And that jarring cacophony tells you you're listening to the Power of Three podcast, the podcast that's changed its mind about what episode it's dropping today at around 12:30 yesterday. So, yes, that's how on the ball we like to be, because we're zeitgeisting. We're going with what people are talking about. We are today talking about Omega. I'm Kenny Smith, and joining me is top Patrick Troughton impressionist.
Yes, hello, I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us as we talk about Omega. I spent the whole day, listeners. Well, not the whole day, that's a lie. I've spent the last 5 minutes saying Omega in my best attempt at doing a Patrick Troughton voice. Omega, why the heck are we talking about Omega? Well, because we don't want to preempt too much the conversation that we're going to have after the finale. Because obviously, in our regular discussions, we're only up to the end of, episode 6, whatever it was called. I can't even remember.
Yeah, the one with no, hang on. Episode 6 was that one. Yeah, that one. So yes,
yeah. So there you go. That says it all.
Space Eurovision.
Of course. Goodness me, that's how well 2025 Doctor Who's sticking in our heads. Anyway, so yes, the big reveal in the latest episode. After lots of stuff and some other stuff and some bone dinosaurs that I couldn't tell you why they were there, and an awful lot of stuff that seemed to be very reminiscent of the cover of the Ancestor Cell. I think that's right.
Yes, indeed it is.
You can edit that out. We find out that the Rani is planning to bring back Omega.
Indeed she is, which is an interesting plan, but we will be discussing that next week when we know how the whole plan works out. So I thought it
doesn't work out.
Or indeed.
Anyway, yes.
We'll find out.
Hopefully, and I keep interrupting, and I'm not going to apologise because I'm still hyper from having seen Gary Barlow twice in the space of 24 hours. Hopefully, Doctor Who will put a stop to the Rani's evil scheme. Indeed. Whatever it actually is. Anyway.
Stop the Rani's plans, Doctor Who.
Yeah. Put your trousers on, Doctor Who, and go and stop the Rani's plan. Right, I know this preempts part of the conversation, but didn't you look cool as in a double-breasted pinstripe suit?
He did. The sort of like rocking the sort of the John Steed kind of look. And
he looked amazing.
He's a horse.
He really, really did. God bless him. Anyway, right. So I'll shut up for 20 seconds.
That's a good plan. And I will say that today we are going to be talking about the Big Finish script. The Big Finish release that was number 47 in their schedule. And it was the first of the Villains Trilogy in the 40th anniversary year. And this script was written by Nev Fountain. And it was called
Omega.
Not where I thought you were going to go with that.
You thought I was going to say Omega.
I did.
I don't want you to hate me any more than you already do at this juncture.
That's fine.
Listeners, I've known Kenny for a long time, and I know his expression when he's feeling a little bit impatient. And he's doing it now, whether he realises it or not. Anyway, I'll continue to try and shut up for a minute.
Indeed. So yes, we're going to be talking about this release, and we're going to have 4 people to tell us all about the making of it as well. 4 special guests. But we're not going to tell who they are just now. You can hear about them shortly. But Dave, why don't we first of all hear a trailer for
Omega? That's a great idea.
Doctor Who, Omega.
Once upon a time, there was a lonely time plumber called Palix, who worked alongside the great Omega. You may have heard of the great Omega.
I was never up in the more obscure figures in Time Lord history.
But how do you know this?
Because I do. I'm Vandikirian, conscience of the universe.
Who are you? What are you? What have you got to do with Omega? Omega. That's right. Omega.
Perhaps I prefer myself as a monster. Better to shape the universe than to be one of history's victims. You should be on your knees, screaming for the universe to forgive you. For all my reputation as a warlord, a tyrant, a megalomaniac, I am a fragile flower compared to you.
Anyone got anything they want to ask? Omega. Anyone? Yes.
Didn't you play the Randy Priest in Hearts in Orbit on channel 30,008?
You, my metal friend, are an electronic mugging machine.
Would you like to consider other related titles, sir?
No, I think electronic mugging machine will quite suffice.
I am now, as my brother Time Lords knew me before, Doctor. No monster, no tyrant, just the first and greatest scientist of our people.
There we go.
Could mix things up and play the Davros trailer instead.
That would just be silly. We're not going to do...
Why didn't we do one about Davros when he popped up in that comic? We're probably too busy. Because we were doing daily books at that point. Anyway, right.
So, Dave, you have your copy of the CD there. Could you kindly tell us what the back cover blurb has to tell us about this adventure?
It reads, Omega, 4-part story written by Nev Fountain, directed by Gary Russell. I bumped into Nev Fountain on the Strand a few years ago, literally a couple of days after I'd listened to his contribution to the 50th anniversary thing when there was a different Doctor thingy every month.
Oh, yeah.
Was it Destiny the Doctor? Was that what it was called? Can't remember. Lovely man. Didn't mind a silly Scotsman stopping him and telling him how good his Doctor Who Christopher Columbus thing was. But anyway, directed by Gary Russell, friend of the show, and the blurb reads like this. A strange telepathic message prompts the Doctor to travel to the sector of Forgotten Souls, a place where, thousands of years ago, Omega's ship vanished while detonating a star. He's not the only one journeying towards it. Jolly Chronologies prides itself on giving its tourists an experience of galactic history that's far better than mere time travel. Its motto is, we don't go into history, we prefer to bring history to you. When Omega's ship suddenly materialises in front of their shuttle and one of their employees goes insane and tries to destroy his hands, suddenly, it's not just a motto anymore, and Omega and his madness is closer than they think.
So yes, I'll quickly run through the cast for this one. The Doctor, Peter Davison, Omega, Ian Collier, Professor Erticus, Patrick Duggan, Glinda, Anita Elias, Maven, Faith Kent, Dalland, Hugo Myatt, Cynthia Caroline Monroe, Zagreus, Jim Sangster, and Tarpoff, Conrad Westmaas. So
now, very quickly, I must just sort of say how hilarious the fact that it was that Jim Sangster played Zagreus, because this story, I think I'm right in saying, was released in the build-up to the release of the Zagreus story. So we'd been waiting for a while to find out what was going to happen to the Eighth Doctor after the end of Neverland.
Indeed.
And there'd been a couple of stories where Zagreus sits upon the chair. Zagreus tried to bleach his hair. Zagreus is looking over there and sees you in your greeting, that sort of thing. I made that up on the spot. Listen, how impressive.
That was very good.
I will do Zagreus rhymes to themes and items of your choice at a cost of £1 new English pound. There'd been other sort of plays where Zagreus had been dripped references, and I think one of the Sixth Doctor stories when Colin sings part of the rhyme, and there was all this anticipation. So Jim Sangster, lovely man, he's from the Liverpool area, and obviously Neverland had finished with the Eighth Doctor being sort of possessed by Zagreus, as it were, or thinking something like that. It's a while since I've listened to it. And of course, Paul McGann's from Liverpool. So someone had the brilliant wheeze of an idea of getting Scouser Jim Sangster to voice Zagreus in this museum history thing as a Scouser. It was amazing.
It was a great idea. We'll find out whose idea it was very, very soon.
Good. Did you listen to this when it was first released?
Oh yes, I mean, I was a subscriber at this point, and I was sort of itching for that white padded envelope to come through the post every month in these pre-download days. And I remember, I think I mentioned on here before, that in the days before Zagreus was out, I was like literally phoning home to Jen every day. It's like, is it there yet? And she's like, no. Is it there yet? No. And then it finally arrived on a Saturday morning, and obviously I wasn't driving anywhere, so I couldn't really be a rude boyfriend in those days and not listen to it.
Rubbish. That's terrible.
I know.
Zagreus tries to bite your bum. Zagreus dances with your mum. Zagreus slaps you till you're numb and laughs while you lie bleeding. That's another one, listeners. Just off the top of my head.
I almost swear you're dose prepared, but I know you're not.
No,
no notes there whatsoever.
I'm just
it's spontaneous. It's called wit.
Well, Mr. and Mrs. Pants.
That's the one.
Amazing. Blackadder. Listeners, what's your favourite episode of Blackadder? Write to the earth2podcast@gmail.com and Peter will pass it on. I didn't actually hear this till I think it must have been about 2015, 2016 when I was working at HMV Glasgow Fort and having my huge, massive Big Finish catch-up. I've got it on CD, so I'm guessing it must have still been available when I bought it at that point. I don't think I would have bought the CD when it was first released. And it was an interesting one because it's very clever. I think it's up there with Whispers of Terror in that it does something that an audio drama will let it do that perhaps maybe, definitely not a TV story, maybe not a book, wouldn't be able to do quite so successfully. And obviously, listeners, there's going to be some spoilers in some of the conversations coming up. So if you've not heard the story, perhaps, I think it's going to only going to be $2.99 now. I think on the
$3.99, yeah,
something like that. $3.99
direct from BigFinish.com.
Yeah, so you can go and buy it for hee haw, and then listen to it, and then come back and listen to the rest of this episode if you don't know the story. I would encourage you to do so. It's very, very good. Peter Davison's phenomenal in it, and it's a very, very interesting idea. Hats off to Nev Fountain for pulling it off, because it really is marvellous.
It is indeed. Tell you what, why don't we have a pause now? Why don't we hear from the people who made it, and then we'll come back at the end and we'll discuss it.
That's an excellent idea, and it will shut me up for 5 minutes.
Actually, I think you'll find it's about 42 minutes, but there we go.
That's all right then. Good. Right, I'll go to the loo and come back then.
My name is Gary Russell, and I was the producer and director of Omega, which was the first script for Big Finish written by Nev Fountain.
Of course, this had initially started out as Toy Maker, but the plans for that...
It was a Toy Maker. My original idea was to do a Toy Maker story because I love the Toy Maker. I'm obsessed with the Celestial Toy Maker. It wasn't by Nev. In fact, it's about 4 writers all had a bash at trying to find something new and interesting to do with the Toy Maker that wasn't a rehash of the Toy Maker and wasn't a rehash of Nightmare Fair. And people struggled with it. And was it Mark Platt? It might have been Mark. No, I don't think it was. I can't remember. Someone had got one to the point where I thought, no, this will work. This is an interesting story. By then, we knew it was going to be Davison, not Colin, because we'd already decided that I was going to put Colin up against Davros in his solo story. And I think I think Cav and Mark, or Cav rather, when we've been talking about Master, wanted it to be McCoy. So the Toy Maker was going to be with Peter Davison, which I thought would be interesting because Peter isn't sort of a natural toy makery kind of person, puzzles and games and things. I mean, ironically, after this, we gave Axis of Insanity to Peter, which is very much a Toy Maker-like story with the Jester and everything like that in it. And I think that maybe to some extent, Axis of Insanity is a hangover for me, my frustration of not being able to do Peter Davison versus Celestial Toy Maker. But anyway, we had all this in hand, and we were working along on various storylines. And I think we got close to the one I really wanted to do. And then I spoke to Mick Goff, and actually, I spoke to his agent first of all, and that came back with a no. So then I mentioned this to Annika, and I said, I'm not going to ask you to talk to Mick because I know that's not going to work. But I said, do you think Jasper would talk to him on my behalf? Jasper is Annika and Mike's son, and I know Jasper quite well at that point. And I said, do you think Jasper would talk to him? And she said, ask him. So I did. And he asked Mick whether he wanted to do it, and he didn't. And I thought, okay, so if the agent's going to say no and your own son you're going to say no to, I will take the hint that he was pretty much, he'd retired. I mean, I still think he was probably, every time Tim Burton said, do you want to do something, he was going to say yes. But I think that was it for Michael Goff, really. It was like, if you're not Tim Burton and I'm not working with Johnny Depp, I'm probably not going to do something. And I'm not Tim Burton and we weren't working with Johnny Depp. So he was not interested in redoing the Toy Maker. And I had a policy that unless it was absolutely essential, I don't believe in recasting. So that went out the window. So then I was left with, well, what else can I do? And I think it was Davey Darlington that said, well, look, you've just worked with Ian Collier on Excelis, or you'd worked with Ian Collier on Excelis, and Ian's lovely. He said, why don't you do Omega? And I went, ooh, oh, I like the sound of that. And I think Davey was thinking, I wouldn't mind doing the post-production on that. He didn't do the post-production in the end. He was very, it was very much his suggestion to get Ian in. And then I thought, okay, do I go with Ian or do I go? There's choice here, Stephen Thorne. And I thought, I do want to go with Ian Collier for two reasons. One, I knew him. He's a beautiful actor, beautiful man, and has a voice to die for. Toby Robinson and I used to sit at the Moat, and we would just look at each other at odd moments when an actor with a particularly gorgeous voice would be acting, and you'd just see all the meters on Toby's machinery, just like they would almost be sighing, going, oh, this is so beautiful to record. And Ian was one of those people that during Excelis had done that, and Toby was going, oh, I can listen to that voice and what it does and how it performs on audio all day long. And I thought, well, also this is going to be Davison dealing with Omega, and therefore it makes sense for it to be the Omega he dealt with in Arc of Infinity rather than the one they all dealt with in the Three Doctors. So that's what I took to Nev, was I said, he'd done Death Comes to Time, and we'd met at a party somewhere. I think Johnny Morris had introduced me to Nev, and he'd been saying he wanted to do stuff. He pitched a couple of ideas, which I hadn't really gone with. Nev is Nev's approach is to start with the comedy and find the drama in the comedy, and I'm much more into starting with the drama and finding comedy within that. So we had little conversations about that, but he went away and said he would submit an idea for an Omega story. It wasn't a commission. He was going to go away and just submit this idea. And he did, and this frankly brilliant thing came back that just hooked me because of the outrageousness of the cliffhanger to episode 3. And I just thought, yeah, you understand what I want from audio. You understand how clever we can be with audio. That's a stroke of genius. So I was immediately sold on that. I love the idea of actors playing the part, this kind of, every time you go to an old castle or the Viking place in York and things like that, the Jorvik Centre and all of this, there's always people playing, I am King Ethelred of Gossamania, blah, 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 blah. And so there's this outer space spaceship that takes people, and they take them to this space station, and there are people there being Vandakirian and Omega, and I just loved all of that. I loved the two mad old ladies. I thought they were brilliant, and the dotty professor and the stewardess, who you think is, just a stewardess, and then you later on realise that she's 2 sandwiches short of a picnic, to say the least. And it just sung to me off the fairly detailed synopsis that Nev had done. I mean, he really worked hard. I think that synopsis was about 12 pages long. It was almost a scene by scene. And so I fell in love with it, and I commissioned it immediately, and off he went. And while he was writing, and I have to say, by this stage we were quite late, because the Toymaker thing had fallen through, he didn't have a great deal of time. Like, I need this first draft of this within about a week. And I think Nev was thinking, how about a month? And I went, how about 2 weeks? And he went, how about 3 weeks? I went, how about 2 weeks? And he went, I can do it in 2 weeks, which is a hell of a thing to throw at somebody who's never written for Big Finish before. But we were. This was panic time. Davros was recorded, Master was recorded, everything was done and dusted, and this was going to be the first of the ones released, and we didn't have much time because this falls into the Gary Russell anal retentive. No, they have to be released in doctor order, and sensible people would be saying to me, no, you could just release them as you've got them. If Davros or Master comes first, it's not going to upset the audience. It'll upset me. It needs to go Peter Davison, Conor Baker, Sylvester McCoy. And people like Nick and Ian Barrington would be staring at me going, it really doesn't. I mean, yes, it has to be. So suddenly this whole sort of Omega thing had to be done very, very quickly.
Hello, I'm Nev Fountain, and I wrote Omega.
What do you remember about the initial approach for it? Because obviously you'd worked in Death Comes to Time, which I'm sure you worked with that meek writer Dan Friedman, and then of course you get to go out and do one on your own.
It was a complete bolt from the blue, to be quite honest, because I think at the time Dan and his cohorts were seen as the enemy by Big Finish. They pretty much cornered the market in audio Doctor Who. And then Dan came along making an official BBC audio version, and a huge amount of attention was made of it simply because it was commissioned directly by the BBC rather than given their blessing. So I think there was a certain amount of suspicion at the time. But it was a surprise to me that Gary approached me, even though I'd sent him a proposal for a Doctor Who story just before that, something to do with, it was a mad mixed bag, sort of like a backup strip on Doctor Who Weekly with Sontarans and Cybermen and all that. I can't remember much about it, but it had a shell-shocked Sontaran veteran and a Cyberman plot, which was a lot of elements were a lot like real time about a human becoming a Cyberman, it all being in a time loop kind of thing. So I'd sent that off, but I didn't kind of expect a lot because I probably was seen as on the other side of the trench. I was on the German side. So it was a surprise to say, well, how would you like to do Omega for our 40th anniversary? And that was quite a surprise, a huge surprise, because I think, track record in writing Doctor Who, I hadn't done any books. I hadn't done any comic strips at the time. So, fair play to Gary for just saying, would you like to do this? And I said, would you like to try for it? So I didn't know I'd actually got it, but Gary was saying, would you like to try for it, was him actually saying, would you like to do it? So I assumed I was still pitching for the job, but I was actually hired to do the job.
It must have been quite exciting being given a villain who'd only previously appeared in anniversary years.
Well, at the time, I think it was incredibly exciting for me. I mean, actually writing for a Doctor myself, for Peter, and doing a villain who's only appeared twice before. And a very interesting villain. I think I was very lucky to get Omega as opposed to Master and Davros. It really chimed with me, this tragic villain who just spends his time just his nose pressed up against the glass of our universe, just looking to get in. A tragic, betrayed figure. I think when I was writing, I spent a lot of time listening to Pink Floyd and Shine On You Crazy Diamond. I think I did equate Omega a lot like Syd Barrett as this cracked, guilty secret. Now, at the time, those like Pink Floyd are all kind of successful and they're all quite self-indulgent. But in the backs of history, there was Syd Barrett being crazy. So, yeah, I did see Omega as a kind of Syd Barrett.
I'd assume you went back and watched the 2 TV episodes or the 2 TV stories, I should say, to get into the swing of things, to capture his voice in your head, or voices.
Well, absolutely. As I said many times, watching Arc of Infinity helped me get the story right. I'd sent Gary one synopsis, which was all right. It was based on The Flying Dutchman, which I thought was a good setting off point. But it was okay. I mean, the Scintillans thing, that was kind of like a genuine thing. But the idea that the Doctor was Omega, and we only found out the Doctor was Omega in episode 3, came out through Arc of Infinity, just watching Omega stand up and talk with the Doctor's voice. And I thought, oh, yes, that's really good, because I've been looking to do a good radio Big Finish, a Big Finish that would only work on audio. I think someone had said that this Big Finish that only works on audio, and I listened to it and goes, well, no, you can possibly do this on television. I want one that's impossible to do on television. So I'd started with the first proposal to try and do something like that. And it was all about a bit about lip reading or something like that. But the idea that the Doctor and Omega would talk with the Doctor's voice at certain times, and only people in the scene would see that happen, and we couldn't. Arc of Infinity was the way. It was the key. So yeah, watching the first two stories was absolutely essential for me. It was absolute revelation.
I suppose then, with that in mind, that it was always Ian Collier's Omega that you had the voice of rather than the original.
Well, Ian Collier got a better crack of the whip in a lot of ways. He had that beautiful kind of ending for him, sort of lurching through the streets like Frankenstein's monster and cowering before the Doctor. It was very affecting. He really got interesting enough, I mean, I obviously prefer Three Doctors because it's such a fun romp with Troughton, but yeah, it's a better Doctor story. But Arc of Infinity is a better Omega story because it really shows him at his most vulnerable. And, like a wounded animal roaming the streets in his boiler suit like Frankenstein's monster. It's very affecting. I mean, the 4th episode of Arc of Infinity, it's one of those odd Doctor Who stories which gets better as it goes along rather than just has a strong openings episode and then slides away. I mean, the location is just beautiful. And as I say, it was the key. It was the key to unlock Omega, the story for me, yeah.
The episode 3 reveal is just genius. It's the cliffhanger that you never saw coming. I remember at the time listening and going, whoa, I'm completely wrong-footed.
Oh, thank you. I mean, as I say, it's very exciting for me to make it work. One doesn't go in a story looking for twists, but one looks to present a story in the best possible way. And once you have that idea that we are still with Omega, who still looks like the 5th Doctor, and he's still having a mental breakdown, you just play with it as much as you can before the reveal. I'm not sure much changes after the episode 3 cliffhanger, but it's certainly very affecting that we're with Omega all the way through. No, I was very happy with that concept. I'm very happy that it was a pure audio Big Finish that could only work in that medium.
Ian Collier returned to play Omega for the first time since Arc of Infinity back in 1983, and the actor spoke to the Big Finish audio magazine issue 4, released on CD, about playing the part.
I mean, I did play the video of Arc of Infinity just to check it out, and
Ian Collier.
Well, I just checked out roughly whether it was OTT as I thought it was, and yes, it was. It was limited then because of the complicated outfit and having my heads encased in fiberglass, so it all had to be done it had to be revoiced afterwards because none of the original stuff could be used. They've given him a great deal more breadth. I mean, you know a lot more about Omega this time than I did before, though I think some of the fans know a great deal more about Omega than I do anyway. Only because, of course, I'm not the original actor to play Omega. There was one with the 3 Doctors. I've never seen that, so I don't know quite what that Omega was like. I just gave mine with Peter as it was.
And so while Nev was writing, I was looking at the synopsis, and my brain just went, I know, if I'm going to have Ian, I'd phoned Ian and said, will you do this? In fact, I said, having been stung by Michael Gough, I checked with Ian, and yes, his agreement to do it was what made Omega happen. And then I thought, what if I got Stephen Thorne to play Dalland, the actor playing Omega? That would be funny. And then luckily, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, after I decided how funny that was, I actually thought that's really insulting to Stephen. That's really, really insulting, Stephen. Hi, here's the part you originally created. We got the second guy to actually play Omega, and we want you to play fake Omega. And I thought, I can't do that, Stephen Thorne. That's just rude. So I didn't even approach him. I just had the good sense to wake up and go, that's a nice idea on paper, but actually is not a nice thing to do to an actor. So then I thought, well, I've got to get someone who is quite fruity. And it was Ian Farrington who said he'd been a fan of Nightmare as a kid. He loved Nightmare. And so he just went, look, there's an actor I love and I've always wanted to meet, and that's Hugo Myatt. And I'd never heard of him because I didn't know Nightmare at all. I'm too old for that. But he showed me some episodes of Nightmare, and I just listened to Hugo Myatt's voice and I went, oh my God, yes. And so I found out who his agent was, and we got into... Actually, no, we didn't. We got in touch with Hugo direct. Somehow we found out where Hugo was. I don't think he had an agent at that point. And we just went to him direct and said, do you want to do this? And he was all absolutely up for it. And so that was a brilliant piece of casting that led then to all his stuff in Gallifrey later, because, frankly, you want to work with Hugo Myatt every day of your life if you can. He should have been Doctor Who on telly at some point. He's just brilliant. And then there was this young actor called Conrad Westmaas, who Clay had introduced me to, and said, "Oh, he's actually coming to work for me for a while on Doctor Who magazine. He's going to be my assistant editor for a few weeks while he's in between acting jobs. But you should think about him, if you need a, spear carrier or guard captain or robot voice or something like that." And I met Conrad in a pub, as you do. And we just hit it off. And I thought, I'm wasting you on a bloody spear carrier. And so I offered him Vandekirion and said, he's a Doctor Who fan, so he knew the mythos of everything. We'd got the script by this point from there, the first draft script from there. So I was able to give him far more detail about it. And so he was on board for that.
Hello, my name's Conrad Westmaas, and I played Tarpov in Omega.
Do you remember how you came to be cast in Omega by Gary?
Yes, I did a short stint on Doctor Who magazine for about 6 months, and it was fantastic. But it was in Tunbridge Wells, which was it took me a good couple of hours commute from London. I was acting at the time, and it kind of wasn't. It was a little difficult to kind of hop back for auditions and stuff, because often you get a very short notice call for an audition. So I had to kind of leave. And I think it just came about from that, really. Gary became aware that I was a sort of young actor doing stuff, and perhaps it was a bit of a leaving present from Doctor Who magazine. So I kind of got a day or two on a Big Finish audio, just with a Davison story. I was thrilled to bits, because as a lifetime fan, it was to be on Doctor Who was like the ultimate. And I thought, well, this is it. This is my moment. So I kind of put everything into it. I remember I hired a director friend of mine and also a voice director friend of mine to kind of really help me work on that script. And I did everything on it. And yeah, when it came to the day, just gave it my all. So that's how I got involved.
It must have been really exciting to be working with a Doctor Who and, of course, one of the big villains as well that people always seem to love in fandom.
Yeah, it was a huge thrill. I remember being a bit kind of, it was a bit odd because it was a very small studio in the Moat, and you couldn't always get everyone in there at first. So most of my scenes actually weren't done with Peter. I did a few with him, but a lot of them weren't. But I went back and listened to it, and they did such a good job listening back. It's just seamless, and it sounds like he's having to kind of resuscitate me and shout at me and all this kind of stuff, and it sounds brilliant. So no complaints there. But yeah, it was really wonderful and magical to kind of be with those people for a couple of days. And Ian Collier was incredible, because I remember him, of course, from seeing him on TV. And the thing that struck me about him was his voice. He had. It was a voice that was so deep and booming, you could feel it in your nether regions when he spoke. It kind of shook the floor. That was my abiding physical memory of Ian Collier.
Then I needed to find the mad old people in the middle of the play. And I'd gone back to Nev and said, this is really, really good. I said, the drawback is you've written about enough material for a 28-parter here. I said, I need 4 discs to make this version of Omega, so you really need to condense it. I said, but don't lose the jokes, because every one of those jokes is funny. Every single one of them. I said, we'll never get the little prick joke past the BBC, where Sentia jabs a hypodermic into Darland at one point, and I can't. What was that, and what's going on, or something like that. And she says, the answer to both those questions is a little prick. And I said, we'll never get that past the BBC, but I'm leaving it in case we can. And we did, because the BBC, I don't think anyone at the BBC batted an eyelid at it. It's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant jokes. I said, keep all the jokes, unfortunately, and keep all the story, because there was no difference to the story. It's just that Nev overwrote every line of dialogue and every scene. Every scene was 20 pages long. So while he's busy hacking this down, I'm trying to find actors. So Anita Elias had been one of the first people who'd ever written to Big Finish way back when we first launched, and she'd sent a tape in, and I'd never found a part for, all her stuff on her voice tape was her playing mad Jewish mothers in the way like the lady from Agony, who played Maureen Lipman's mother. Everything she did on this tape was that. And suddenly this part came, I went, yes, as a mad old Jewish lady who can be fantastic and funny and witty and clever and charming. And she was lovely, Anita. I thought she was brilliant. Mad as trees, but she was great fun and fantastic. And then Faith Kent, who I had seen in El Dorado and thought was brilliant in El Dorado. And I suddenly realized that she was represented by one of the agents. And I said, do you think Faith would do this? She's got to be a dotty old woman who it turns out isn't a dotty old woman at all, but is in fact from the future and is a powerful Time Lord's kind of character. And they went, oh yeah, she'd be brilliant for that. And they also had on their books Patrick Duggan. And Patrick I only knew from Father Ted. And I thought, yeah, nice, that I can see that. He could be brilliant as the professor. Little mad Irish professor would be great fun. So boom, those three parts were all cast. And I'd spoken to Jim Sanctor and said, listen, can you pop up to studio at some point? Because, you know, we've got Paul McGann playing Zagreus, so I need a good Scouse accent to do the spoof Zagreus. And so Jim said, yeah, I'll come and do it. All right, hey, come and do that. So, you know, so we had the little Zagreus thing. And then the last thing I had to cast was Sentia. And I had met at a convention, a Doctor Who convention, years and years earlier. I had met Caroline Munro. And when you meet Caroline Munro, you don't forget Caroline Munro. She's beautiful. She is, you know, she is that 70s sex symbol for a reason, in that she is stunningly beautiful and she never ages. She just doesn't age. But more importantly, she's a really lovely person and a very, very smart cookie. And she was at a convention talking about the Last of the Time Lords film that her husband had put together and she was going to star in and she was going to be in. And it was in the green room of this convention, and she and I got talking, and I actually didn't talk to her at all about Doctor Who. I talked about the fact that she'd recorded a single and indeed an unreleased album with Gary Newman. And I was far more excited by that. And you know, I said, I love the single and I wish you'd done, oh, well, we sort of started to do an album, but it never happened and blah, blah, blah. And she was in London. She didn't often come to London, and she was in London for something. And I just, on the spur of the moment, phoned the hotel that she was staying at and said, I need to leave a message for Caroline Munro. And I just left this message explaining that we talked many, many years ago and Big Finish, blah, 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 the longest stupid message in the world. She phoned back about 10 minutes later and said, why don't we have a drink? Come up to the hotel, we'll have a drink. So I popped over that evening and we had a nice catch up. And I said what this part was and explained Omega and explained who he was and Doctor Who, because she's, you know, she's not a Doctor Who fan, she didn't know very much about Doctor Who. And she absolutely bought into all of it and thought it was fantastic. And so, boom, I had my Sentia. And I remember saying to Nev that I'd want Caroline Munro playing Sentia. And there was this brilliant long pause that only Nev can give at the end of a phone as his brain is digesting, you know, oh, writing for Peter Davison, that's nothing. Writing for Hugo Meyer, that's nothing. Writing for Ian Collier, that's nothing. But writing for Caroline Munro, and he's like a little gibbering wreck going, oh my God, I've got to make these words beautiful and amazing and fantastic. It's Caroline Munro. Anyway, so there we were.
Working with Hugo was really, really thrilling, not least because he was in my first scene. And this was my first time ever in a studio on audio. So working with somebody of that caliber really helps because you've got someone really strong to lean against. And when you're a young actor, you don't necessarily know what you're doing. Although, you know, I had sort of committed and prepared in my head what I was doing, and I was pretty like, okay, I'm good with these decisions. But when you've got someone that strong to play off, and his comedy in that is delicious. I listened to it last night, and he just made me laugh so much. He was glorious. So I was really fortunate to get to work with him. Yeah. He was the first actor I worked with in Big Finish, so I was very, very lucky. He does have a kind of just a very wry, underplayed sparkle, and it's really good because obviously we're playing ham actors, so we were like really sort of pushing each other, going more and more over the top. But once we did that first scene, that first one out of the way, and Gary was delighted, there was a real sigh of relief between the two of us, because when the first thing you've got to do is go in and do bad acting deliberately, that's kind of it's kind of a bit of a. It was quite a strange note to start on, but yeah, he was fantastic. Caroline Munro, the thing about I remember is, and we've all done this, is when you've decided in your head how you say something, or how you pronounce something, it's really difficult to change it. And unfortunately, she had got a pronunciation of omega, I can't remember what it was, in her head. That was the one word that she had a very particular way of saying. And I remember Gary having to kind of say, this is something that we can't shift on, sometimes in audio or any play or any drama, if somebody comes in and says, particularly a science fiction name, in a certain way, if it's never been said before, then you can just go by that and say, okay, this is how we're saying this today. But obviously with omega, there's only one way of saying it. So that, I remember her being a little that was a little moment, but she was glorious. And I have to say, at the time, as I said, I just finished working for Doctor Who magazine, and I knew that Scott Gray was a very big Bond fan, and also a big fan of Caroline's, because his eyes widened and his eyebrows shot through the ceiling when I told him I was working with Caroline. So I asked her, would she mind awfully signing a 10x8 to Scott, which she did, with the words, "To Scott, nobody does it better, Caroline Munro," a picture of her in a bikini. I think he was quite happy.
Love it. I mean, when you left the studio, was there any inclination that you were back, or did you just think, okay, that's me, done it, I'm off to the next one?
No, when I left after the 2 days, although it was Doctor Who and it was a huge thrill, and because I put a lot into it, I was like, well, I think I've done as well as I can. I was more worried about what it would be like coming out, but no, I think I was just then on to the next job and looking for the next piece of work. So it's very interesting acting Doctor Who when you're a Doctor Who fan, because you've got two modes. You're in two minds. You've got your professional mind on, which you're an actor. This is a job. You've got to run it through your agent. It has to fit in and become part of your work, which is just a hustle if you're an actor. But on the other hand, you're in this fan headspace, and being in the Moat Studios where everyone's behind glass took me back to going to the Longleat Doctor Who exhibition. It was like being in a living Longleat Doctor Who exhibition, apart from, you've got real actors and your heroes instead of latex monsters.
And of course, being a part of a 40th anniversary story, I had to make sure I get that right. Must have been quite exciting as well, just that added celebration to it.
Yeah, I hadn't really realised until I've looked back that since Signs of Time, this was the first special, if I'm right in saying, that Big Finish have done, with this Villains Trilogy of Omega, Davros and the Master. So it's really exciting to be in the first one of those. If I've understood correctly, I think Omega was due to be the last one of the trilogy, but got bumped forward for whatever reason. And there was talk of it being maybe a Celestial Toymaker at some point, but that at some stage evolved into Omega. But I thought it was a good choice, and it was a good choice to do as a comedy, and to do Omega as a sort of slightly, as a story about failed ambition and tarnished reputations, and the sort of stories that we tell ourselves and tell about other people. I started, and with Nev Fountain, hot off the press with Dead Ringers as a comedy writer, I thought it was a really nice choice. And I listened to it last night, and at first you were always like, oh God, I've got to listen to something with my own voice in it. But actually I got into it and I thought it was hilarious. I just laughed an awful lot.
And I had the script, and we got it down to a reasonable length. I mean, it is still desperately overlong. Overlong's the wrong word, actually. It isn't overlong, but it is desperately long. But I don't think it's boring. I don't think it outstays its welcome, Omega. I think and that's because of the humour, and that is because of that marvelous bit of rug pulling at the end of episode 3, and it's the performances. I mean, God, Ian Collier is so good in it. Caroline's very, very good in it, and obviously Hugo and Conrad are just brilliant in it. But in the studio, we were beset with problems, and I think I got Patrick to play a couple of other parts as well. I got Patrick to play the old Time Lord professor that challenges Palix and calls him Omega for the first time. And I think I also got him to play a sort of security guard as well, who's on Omega's ship, which was then re-recorded, I think, possibly by me or possibly by Nev, actually. It might be Nev in the final version, because Patrick sounded the same in all 3 parts. And the 2 old ladies were brilliant and dotty and amazing, but they could not do all the technobabble. They just floored them, and they couldn't get anyone's name right. And then the biggest problem I had across the entire thing is the only 2 people in this, 3 people in this entire script who could say Omega were Peter Davison, Ian Collier and Conrad Westmaas. They all knew it was Omega. Everyone else is Omega. and I'd be stopping in the middle of sex going, Omega. Oh, yeah, Omega, blah, blah, Omega. Omega. And so this slowed production down tremendously. Caroline, I think, particularly kept saying Omega, but so did the old ladies, so did Patrick. And Peter Davison was getting understandably frustrated by this. And he came up, he came into the booth with me, and I don't know whether it was Toby or was it Lee? It might have been Lee recording at that point, I can't remember. Yeah, it was Lee. It was one of Lee's last ones, I think. And he just came in and he sat down and said, right, can I make a suggestion? He said, your post-production people will hate me for this, but can we just record it as it is? And at the end of the day, you get each of those actors into the room and you just get them to say the word Omega in 5 different ways and splice it into the dialogue, or we just recast and start again. And I said, well, that's not going to happen. And he said, no, that's not going to happen. He said, but we cannot keep stopping. He said, because they know they're getting it wrong, but they're getting upset by it. I'm finding it very, very difficult to keep going because I really register the fact they're saying Omega and not Omega. And so for the most part, actually, I didn't need to do it, but I did take Peter up on that offer at the end of the first day, and I got them all to say the word Omega about 5 different ways. Omega, 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 Omega. And then what I thought at the time was going to be Davey would have to sit down and literally splice this into the dialogue. And I have to tell you that it went to ERS in the end, and Andy ERS had to do this. And there is one instance in the whole play where somebody still says Omega. And I didn't notice it at the time. And it was never mentioned to me at the time. And I only noticed it the other week when I listened to this back. Oh, God, they said Omega. I thought we'd cover it. And it may be that it was impossible to cut that one and drop it in. It might have been the sentence was flowing too much and you wouldn't have been able to pause and splice it in. But that was a nightmare.
Did you go to the studio recording?
I went to one, yeah. I went to the first one. Yeah, that was fun. I remember Caroline Munro not being able to pronounce the word Omega. That was good. Well, yeah, of course, she'd spent most of her life lying around swimming pools wearing expensive watches. So she said Omega all the time because she saw it as the watch. So that was fun. It was an interesting experience for me because I normally write characters very strongly in which you can almost have no option with the casting. You kind of expect you know who you're going to get if I write something in a certain way. And Dalland, in particular, for the story, I actually saw as quite a young man. But the Nightmare guy, and I can't remember his name, Hugo Myatt. Yeah, I can remember his name. He worked really well as a fruity actor. He worked really well. I think I described him originally in the script as some kind of Martin Clunes. Martin Clunes on the inside, Joey from Friends on the outside, which looking back on it now is kind of odd, hearing Hugo Myatt for the past 15 or 20 years. Yeah, 15 years. Yeah, it was very exciting, and Peter was very, both Peter and Ian were very engaged with the story because it was very much them talking a lot. So it was very exciting to watch. I mean, it was a huge thrill. I mean, Death Comes to Time was a big thing for me, but I was basically just an advisor. This was the first proper Doctor Who I'd written since ever. So it was a huge thing for me. I think it's difficult to explain how exciting it was at the time because Big Finish was the only game in town to write. I had no interest in writing the New Adventures. I had no interest in writing the BBC books. But for a performed medium, for a Doctor Who fan, that was the thing. That was it. And to do it, and to write for a Doctor, and write for a villain with 30 years backstory. Was it 40th anniversary? 30 years backstory. It was an incredible thrill, yeah.
We were in post-production with this story, and Andy just said to me, look, he said, I've got to tell you, there is a problem with this. He said, this is long. He said, because even though on script pages, you got the right number of script pages for a normal script, but everyone's performance is terribly ponderous. You know, Ian Collier and Hugo are both delivering their lines very sort of Shakespearean and very sort of, oh, yes, darling, yes, everything's... So, you know, the line that might be, let's go through that door, which normal actors say, let's go through that door, was, let's go through that door. And when you've got that across 4 episodes, your timing, and so this script was incredible, this finished production was incredibly long. And I went up to Leamington and I sat down with Gareth and Andy, and we cut it and we rearranged it and we glued scenes together and we cut swathes of it out. And unfortunately, it meant we lost a lot of stuff. Particularly, we lost a lot of the stuff of Omega's childhood as Palix. There's about 2 scenes of that now. There was a lot more of that originally. There was a lot more of the old ladies being lost, wandering around the thing. So when the revelation happens at the end that one of the one that never stops talking is actually a TARDIS, and the one that thinks is deaf is actually the really smart one, that sort of comes out of nowhere. And I think there's one line in there where I think it's Darlan says, he refers to something that was said to them earlier. And that scene doesn't exist where that was said earlier. We had to cut it out. So there's a lot missing from Omega. You could probably, if it still existed, and I'm sure it doesn't, you could probably do now an Omega special edition and it would be a 3-disc release. You know, there was a lot we cut out, and it's only cut out because we just couldn't fit it on the discs. And it was a bit of a jigsaw at the end of the day, and I don't think it shows. But yeah, there's a lot missing from Omega that had to be cut out.
It sounds wonderful as well. The ERS boys did a great job on that.
They certainly did, and they need a lot of applause for their patience and their determination to make this work. I'm very proud of them for that.
So what do you remember about getting the finished CDs through the post back in the day when we didn't have downloads? That must have been really exciting, having that, you can hear your work and just think, oh my God, this is it. It's real.
I don't remember so much getting the finished CDs through the post on Omega, but I remember the signing in the sort of the 10th Planet shop way out East London with the queue going around the door, because let's say Big Finish was the only game in town. This was like, this is Doctor Who. So, massive queue snaking around the block with Ian signing and me signing, and some people just listening to the whole story while they're in the queue, and then congratulating me on the story that they'd already listened to, as they were purchasing it. No, it was fabulous. I had a photograph taken with Ian Collier by the Dalek. Now this is how fans operate. I was doorstepped. I used to do loose ends monologues for Ned Sherrin. I used to come in on Saturday mornings. I didn't have to, but my writing partner and I liked to go to the shows and see the response to the jokes. So I just was turning up unofficially. No one particularly knew I was doing that, but there was a person outside Broadcasting House with a folder full of photos, and in that folder full of photos was me and Ian Collier and a Dalek to be signed. I mean, that's quite spooky. So, yeah, it was a huge, huge deal. Death Comes a Time was a massive deal, but Big Finish was just as massive for me.
And it's, of course, was your foot in the door.
Yeah, I didn't. One always remembers. I remember Robert Holmes's quote: "I don't want to. If you want to be a writer, you don't go out saying I want to write X or Y. You just say I want to write." So I didn't set out to be a Doctor Who writer. I didn't set out. I followed the money. I did satire. I did radio. I did the Big Breakfast. I did the News Quiz. I've done all these shows. So Doctor Who pretty much landed on my feet when Dan Friedman started setting up his little base of operations practically in the next office. So I would have been a fool not to walk in the door and say, can I help? Happened, the snowball effect. I got invited to a convention in Manchester. I got to know some Big Finish people who talked to Gary about using me, even then. So it snowballs. And one didn't go out to try and find Doctor Who to write for, but on this occasion it sort of found me bit by bit.
What did you think of the musical score?
Oh, very dramatic, very, very portentous. I remember chatting to Russell in the pub and just saying, I think I had to pull something out a bit big for this story because, it's Time Lords, it's Omega, it's this. So I had, pulled something out for this. I mean, I agree with him. I think it's a very good score.
Hello, I'm Russell Stone, and I wrote the music for Omega.
It's an absolute cracker. I spoke to Nev Fountain this afternoon, and he was saying that he just loved it.
Well, that's fantastic. I did actually meet Nev Fountain at the Big Finish 5th anniversary party. It took me a while to pluck up the courage to go and speak to him, but I did eventually. And he was a very lovely chap. And he did tell me then that he really liked the music. And I thought, well, is this the drink talking? Is this just kind of an awkward conversation that it's best to be polite about my music? So that I'm absolutely delighted to hear that he really did like the music. So yes, I mean, and I was equally effusive about his writing as well, because I think in my estimation that's one of the best ones I worked on as well. I think it's kind of up there. It's so epic in scale, I think. And also, again, with a major character from the series. So another no pressure there then. Absolutely thoroughly enjoyed that from start to finish, I remember. Yeah.
The fact you've got, again, another incredible cliffhanger when we found out that at the end of episode 3, the Doctor is not the Doctor and it's actually Omega all the time.
Yes. I don't think I had to do, it wasn't kind of a big cliffhanger reveal musically as far as I remember. In fact, I think I just had some kind of bass beats when the TARDIS landed, I think it was just kind of that was sufficient. I think the big reveal was sufficient at the end of that episode. I don't think any music was required at that point, as I recall.
I think it's a really good atmospheric one. I think we've got plenty of drama, and I think it's one that gives you quite a good few challenges in there. It's not reading the script. It doesn't seem like an obvious one with on how to score it. It's not got like the Galliari clutch or the likes of that, but it's very much a setting you can relate to, like being in spaceships and things like that. And I think it's great. I think it's a really, really clever score.
Thank you. I mean, there's a lot of sadness in there as well. I think as the character of Omega was had some notable suffering scenes, I think, and so just being able to mix and match throughout. It's kind of Nev Fountain's got this brilliant way, like Rob Shearman has, of kind of turning on a sixpence and something quite comedic suddenly becomes quite dark and upsetting as well, and I really enjoy that, and I think that really inspired me musically as well. So yeah, those kind of scenes where the Doctor and Omega are having conversations with each other, well, talking to himself essentially. Yeah, I think they were some of my favourite scenes in that. So I was kind of able to write pathos as well as drama, I think, in that one, which thoroughly enjoyed that.
Was that a good dump, Dave?
Wasn't bad, mate. I've had worse.
Good. Info dump, of course, I'm talking about here from our special guest, Gary Russell, Nev Fountain, the one and only Conrad Westmaas, and indeed Russell Stone. So thank you very much to the team for sharing how they put their talents to work and brought it all together.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. Great to hear from you all. Great to hear from Conrad, especially. When are you doing some more, Conrad? When's Keris coming back? That's a good question, isn't it?
Well, I'm actually speaking to him tomorrow night just for a social call, for a wee catch-up, as we often do.
Good.
And,
That'll ask him then. Just say Dave was asking, not to be a pain or anything.
But...
Right,
yeah.
I'm having a think here on it. So Grace needs to take a poo. Never mind.
So Grace is looking at your shoe.
So Grace needs to take a poo. So Grace only wears one shoe. So Grace
enjoys sniffing glue?
No. So Grace can count up to 2 and sees you when you're wiping.
Right, let's move on.
Listeners, I have a bad habit of trying to make Kenny laugh. It's a bad habit. I like making Kenny laugh. It's fun. So there you go.
It's like a nun with ill-fitting clothes.
I make no apologies for trying to make Kenny laugh. So there you are.
They're succeeding.
Yes, so I suppose we can talk about the plot openly now.
Yes, I mean, it's all building up beautifully to that episode 3 cliffhanger, which we've discussed previously with the creative team, and never saw that coming. It's just bang.
It's such an obvious, brilliant idea, and people made comparisons to Fight Club and all that sort of thing, in reviews and things. But it's genius, and it's at no point do you suspect that the Doctor and Omega aren't both there. And it's later on in the thing in part 4 when someone sort of reviews some CCTV footage and you see that it's what looks like the Doctor, because Omega is in the body of the Fifth Doctor, is doing all this stuff and talking to himself in weird voices. But because we're listening to it, we don't see what's actually happening. We only hear what's actually happening. And that's what I was saying. That's what I meant when I said earlier that it wouldn't work so well on television, or indeed, it might work as a novel. I'm sure someone as skilled as Nev could adapt it into prose very well. And it's the cliffhanger of part 3, listeners, obviously, as we may have discussed, TARDIS turns up, door opens, and the Doctor steps out, and you just sort of go, because everyone remembers the plot of Arc of Infinity, where, that brilliant scene at the end where Omega has tried to steal the Doctor's biodata, and he takes off his big mask after all the green slime has been poured out of him, and he's Peter Davison's immaculate hair underneath. It's fascinating to think that we're now further away from the Big Finish Omega story than that was from Arc of Infinity.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Isn't it just, though? Oofed. Kenny looks pained. Listeners, Kenny's looking pained for the benefit of our YouTube viewers.
Yeah.
We should probably... So if this came out sort of tail end of 2000... Would this been, August, September 2003, something like that? Where were you in 2003? What were you up to? What was happening?
I was just finishing up my spell as interim chief reporter at the Wishaw Press, as I'd been removed from that job and made to go and work in our subs desk, which I hated, and they let me go back when my successor was off with a long-term illness, and I knew that was coming to an end as Helen was coming back. Living in my flat, getting ready to go to Panopticon for the 40th anniversary convention.
Yes.
A few weeks later, and gently living in East Kilbride with my girlfriend. And
tail end of 2003, I shifted from HMV Sauchiehall Street, where I'd been very happy, to HMV East Kilbride, where I generally wasn't very happy. But such is life, that's the way it goes. Yeah, and I was also at Panopticon. I have no memory of speaking to you at Panopticon, which is odd. I remember speaking to DJ and Robert at one point, but I can't remember seeing you there at all. Anyway, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a good one. And I remember meeting Nev there, and he signed my Big Finish Inside Story book, which was released that weekend, which was really exciting.
I bought a copy of that too and dug it off the shelf today to have a flick through to remind myself of what they were saying, the people involved were saying about it. So that was interesting.
And I later got the script when it was issued in the audio scripts volume 4, which has got Omega, Davros, Master, and Zagreus in it.
Kenny holding the book up for the cover. Hold the cover of the book up for the benefit of our YouTube viewers. Maybe Kenny will remember to post a photograph of the book on the socials, on Facebook or whatever, at some point in the next couple of days. Maybe he'll manage to do that. God bless you. So yeah, it's a very interesting story. I have to confess, my memory of how it all resolved isn't terribly clear, but I do remember thinking that Caroline Munro was great, and not just because she's the love of my life. Just what a skilled job Peter Davison and Ian Collier did. Do we know what they thought of? Do we know what they thought of the story?
We know that Ian Collier spoke about it. We heard him earlier there in the interviews when he spoke to one of the Big Finish audio magazines. So his live recollections, or his live memories, as it were, from recording it were there. So he seemed to have fun, which is great. But the one who really got me in this was Hugo Myatt from Nightmare, who was Treguard, and I just loved him. He's just so rich and fruity and plummy and just milking it for everything, and he's just a wonderful, wonderful voice.
Very much so. There's a lot of very rich and fruity voices in this story, it must be said. I think everyone was it definitely had that authentic mid-80s Doctor Who feel. You can imagine it being, most of it being, shot in TV centre with maybe some model work on film for this one, but mostly studio bound. And on the cusp of that era, of that point of John Pertwee, that cusp of the John Nathan Turner era, where it's sort of slipping a little bit towards everything being brightly lit, and but you can imagine sort of like lots of quality brightly lit BBC sets for this story. Not a difficult one to picture at all.
Certainly. And I absolutely love the score in this one. Russell Stone at his best, and listeners, you can hear it in the background, the full unedited score, courtesy of Russell, who gave it to us.
Hopefully not too loudly that you can hear what we're saying.
No, it's definitely down at an acceptable level. Hang on, just listen. Yeah, that's all right.
Oh yeah, I like that bit actually. I'm glad we went quiet at that point because I like that bit.
Yeah, very good. But no, I thought it was a really entertaining, not what I expected, and I'm so glad we got this instead of the Toymaker story that they'd originally been talking about.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I remember was it something Gary said somewhere that Michael Goff's people weren't very approachable or very dismissive of it straight away.
And
something
his
like
son, him and Annika's son, spoke to him as well, and he said, "No, not interested." So that was where that killed it dead.
Oh wow, that's a shame. But to be honest, I think that whole little trilogy works better because obviously Colin and Terry have worked together a few times for BF. Curse of Davros, my favourite Big Finish Doctor Who story, features Sixth Doctor and Terry together. Terry Willow and Colin Baker, I should say. So I think they've kind of, and I think obviously helped with some of the comic strip stuff. I think the Sixth Doctor and Davros do feel quite synonymous in a way. And sticking the Seventh Doctor with the Master felt appropriate given that the Master was involved in the Seventh Doctor dying. So I don't think you'd have to struggle to find a good strong link between the Fifth Doctor and the Toymaker, I think. So going with Omega, doing a sequel, Arc of Infinity, that builds on Arc of Infinity really, really well, and and adds a little sort of a bit more detail to Omega's story, and gives it, he's always had quite a lot of sort of pathos to it. My pal Steve Higgins, who's like Kenny has contributed many times to the Earth 2 podcast. Hi Steve, if you're listening. By sheer coincidence, this evening was watching the Three Doctors when I spoke to him, because he was showing it to his daughter to get her sort of fully up to speed on who Omega is before the finale. So it was just nice to get a bit more, just giving Omega a bit more sort of, not exactly room to breathe, but just adding a bit more flesh to the bones of his story.
Yep. And talking of Omega again, hiding in plain sight, we got it in Tales from the TARDIS last year. It's there. He was there all along. Yeah, the Three Doctors. That was the story that we got with Katie Manning.
Oh, so it was. Gee whiz.
It was there all the time.
That's right. That's a very good point.
But yeah, for me, this is great. I've really enjoyed sort of rediscovering it, and I think it's one that hopefully a few people will be going out to purchase copies of in the build-up to Saturday's episode.
Yeah, I really hope so. And even when you do know what's happening, it's still masterfully done. I hope everyone that's listening did what I suggested, that hadn't heard the story before. I mean, as we say, it's really cheap on the BF website. You can download it instantly after you've bought it. We're not sponsored by BF, but we just love them dearly, because
do indeed.
They've been doing proper Doctor Who for a very long time, and yeah, it's an interesting one to bear in mind. Am I right in thinking that some of the dialogue from it was sampled in Wish World? There
was a bit from one of the Big Finish Gallifrey stories, Intervention Earth, which had the return of Stephen Thorne as Omega, directed by Scott Hancock, and produced by Scott Hancock, who of course is script editor on the TV show. So.
Right,
they've managed to clear that.
I'd seen a tweet when someone sort of said something about audio from a Big Finish story, and I wasn't sure which one it was. I think I've got that particular Gallifrey release. I haven't listened to the Gallifrey series yet. Actually, bought them all when they were going cheap at one point, but I haven't actually got to them. Should do that before too long, if I ever manage to catch up on all the podcasts that I listen to.
Yeah, well, you've got Hugo Myatt in the first series as well, so there's an extra incentive, perhaps, to.
That reminds me, while we're here, we should give a quick shout out to Shag Matthews from Once Upon a Geek and JSA in the 90s, because I'm about to record with him at the weekend, and I was talking to him the other night, and we were discussing affectionately our mutual pal, that great Kenny Smith and all that. So Shag's a big fan of the episodes that you're doing about the books, so I told him that I would record but he's not listening to them in order.
Right.
He's just sort of doing them at random. So I said I'd be sure to give him lots of mentions over the next few episodes so that he gets to them eventually, and we'll probably get a laugh when it happens. So, Mr. Matthews, waving to you at the camera for the benefit if you're watching on YouTube.
Lovely fella. I met him at Gallifrey at the bar. So.
Of course. Great, right?
Yeah, that was when I went to the convention Gallifrey, not when I went to the Planet Gallifrey, which isn't real, so I never actually went there. Just
imagine you went to... Wait, right. If you did go to Gallifrey, what would be the first thing you'd do when you got there?
Probably look for Romana in her second incarnation, because she's lovely.
Creep.
Oh, she's Lord President. I'm going to make sure that I'm in with the right people.
I would try and get hooked up to the Matrix so I could get a shot of the wee train from Barshaw Park, like Chancellor Goth does in The Deadly Assassin.
Mm.
Anyway, right, we've probably rambled enough, and I'm very tired.
Yes. You better...
You've got to edit out all of our respective swearing and inappropriateness, because we're a bad influence on each other, listeners, at times. You've got to edit all this down to release this tomorrow, you madman who decided to do this at lunchtime today.
Yep. But hey, it's all good. It's all good. It's virtually all ready to go. So, Dave, before we go, this is something we discussed earlier when...
Yes, we did. We had to struggle and think of a song, and I was vaguely aware that Bruce Dickinson had done a song called Oh My God. I'm not exactly sure when. Bruce Dickinson, one time airline pilot, one time lead vocalist with Iron Maiden. Not a band I'm terribly fond of, to be honest, but his first solo album's cracking. You should listen to his version of All the Young Dudes. It's amazing, but we're not going to play with that today. We'll play it with Oh My God. Anyway, listeners, I'm not sure when I'll be back, but look after yourselves, be good, mind how you go, check out the Earth 2 podcast, lots of good stuff coming.
Dave, good to see you.
You too, kid. Be good, mind how you go.
See you soon. Bye, everyone.
Folks.